So, you're fed up with the system. Thankfully, someone wrote an entire book about what should be done. More seriously, if you've reached this video, you're looking for a framework to first and foremost analyze capitalism and critique it, and second of all, to have a viable alternative to offer. And this is exactly the goal of this video. It's to be a reading guide. So everything in this video is available for free as a PDF on the Marxist Internet Archive or as an audiobook on the Socialism for All channel. So the framework of these reading recommendations is Marxist. And our goal as Marxists is to organize the working class as a political power to overthrow the capitalist mode of production and to build socialism. Not get lost in an endless envisionment of a perfect communist utopia. Alright, so let's dive in this sea of paper. So this first section is not as much theory recommendations as they are historical analysis of capitalism. The first recommendation I have is The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein. Starts with a very gruesome expose of how the CIA tortures people with what they call shock therapy in order to have them disavow their beliefs or forget things that have happened due to very incredible trauma. She drew parallels from this to the CIA-backed shock therapy in post-socialist countries, or even in capitalist countries, when they take advantage of disasters or economic collapse or instability to pass free market reforms, which has disastrous consequences. So having concrete examples of things that have happened in the past will always be more persuasive than general arguments or vague statements about how things are in the world. You're not convincing people by telling them that sometimes the US does bad stuff. You have to have a proper framework for this. This one is a beloved reading by Michael Parenti to understand that US foreign policy isn't a pure irrational ideology or something that's abstractly morally wrong. Rather, that it is successful at achieving its goals of first asserting US hegemony, which serves the interest of the US ruling class, and second, of undermining any mass movement or leader which opposes US intervention and refuses to just give away their country's land and resources to the imperial core. This work also analyzes how the US manufactures consent at home for these foreign interventions. Next up, Washington Bullets is a very good work by Vijay Prashad discussing US imperialism. It speaks for itself. If you want to dive deeper into revolutionary movements, CIA-backed atrocities and assassinations, and heroes of national liberation movements like Thomas Sankara, Che Guevara, Fidel Castro, Ho Chi Minh, this is the book for you. Now, Black Shirts and Reds, the second book by Parenti I'm recommending, is key to understanding how fascism arises, how popular leftist movements and communism is crushed by reaction and foreign intervention, how revolutionary socialism has worked in favor of millions of people in the past century. So overall, a very great read. And the way Parenti writes is very clear, very straightforward, very much like his Yellow Parenti speeches. It is interesting, captivating, and very principled. So from these introductory readings, you should have a good understanding of how imperialism, capitalism, and global resistance movements have happened in the past century. Now to actual introductory readings of socialist theory. Now this section lays down a very important theoretical framework to understand the inner workings of capitalism, class relations, why socialism can't just be utopia. We call this scientific socialism, and more specifically the core principles of Marxism, from its Materialist Philosophy to its critique of capitalist political economy. This first one is a summary of 25 questions answered very concisely by Engels, diving into what is communism, what social classes are, where they originated, how capitalism works, and what is the doctrine to do away with this capitalist system. Globally, it's a very insightful first read to know the different concepts when diving deeper into Marxism. Now, these two essays, Wage, Labor and Capital and Value, Price and Profit, they're two different essays. They are excerpts from the larger work Das Kapital, or Capital, by Marx, which I suggest you read up on after these introductory readings. Chapter 1 is very, very important to grasp how value, price and profit work. Now, Socialism, Utopian and Scientific is part of a larger work titled Anti-During, which we'll go over later, and it goes over the Marxist framework for socialism, distinguishing Marxism from the utopians who made vague, idealist prescriptions for how the world should be, without understanding how capitalism worked. So it's a very good read to understand just how important it is to have a scientific outlook to socialism and economic systems, rather than just giving out moralist critiques and vague prescriptions. All in all, a very good read. If you want to gain a stronger understanding of these fundamentals, what the entire outlook is based on, I recommend picking up this short essay from Lenin, which covers the Marxist doctrine of historical and dialectical materialism, the economic doctrine of value, surplus value, and scientific socialism, as well as tactics for the class struggle, the organization of the proletariat against the bourgeoisie. And Lenin is always very easy to understand and enjoyable to read. Finally, for this section, I recommend you pick up this book by José María Sison, a Filipino Marxist-Leninist and founder of the Communist Party of the Philippines. He wrote this from his prison cell in 2007, I think, as a more thorough version of the previously mentioned text by Lenin. So the first part covers the philosophical basis of socialism, the theory of dialectics and knowledge, the material basis of society. The second part covers Marx's critique of capitalist political economy, and Lenin's critique regarding monopolist capitalism and imperialism. And the third part covers the dictatorship of the proletariat, aka the rule of the workers, as opposed to the rule of the capitalists. Imperialism by Lenin is a very important work, though it is very theoretical and analytical. It lays out a very principled definition of imperialism, how it came to be, as the concentration of capital in fewer hands, right? The monopolist nature of capitalism made it mandatory for firms to export capital to keep growing. Overall, if you want to understand the economic basis for geopolitics and more broadly of how capitalism works, Vlad has you covered with this one. And with these readings, you'll understand the basics of Marxism, capitalism, socialism, communism, imperialism, which are very key concepts to grasp. Before continuing, here are some further recommended readings to help you grasp materialism and dialectics. These are not mandatory readings, but it's important to articulate what materialism and dialectics are because they are fundamental to Marxism. The first one is Thesis on Feuerbach by Marx. So similar in form to the Principles of Communism by Engels, these are 11 bullet points on materialism, and they're pretty much just quick notes he took, but they're useful regardless. If you want to dive deeper into it, you can read Ludwig Feuerbach and The End of Classic German Philosophy by Engels. It's a pretty short read, only about 100 pages. It does cover idealism and materialism from Hegel to Feuerbach, all the way to current Marxist dialectical materialism. Next up, it is important to grasp the historical development of society. I recommend reading The Origins of the Family, Private Property and the State by Engels because it analyzes the stages of development of society from the dawn of nomadic societies to a primitive accumulation and the first settlements all the way to current capitalism. And it analyzes how the state arose, how the nuclear family arose, and how private property came to be. Now, I talked about it earlier, but Anti-Düring is a huge work by Engels, opposing Eugen Düring's philosophy that was promoted by Bebel, the leader of the German Social Democratic Party. It goes in detail on the materialist philosophy of Marxism, political economy, and scientific socialism. A very insightful reading. Now, On Contradiction and On Practice by Mao Zedong are very good reads. Mao is someone who's very straightforward in his writings, very easy to read too. And these two works are what is the foundation of Maoism, specifically on overcoming dogmatism and understanding the contradictions that are at the root of every process in the universe, even capitalism and the socialist class struggle. Now that the foundations are laid out, it's time to talk about the actual edification of socialism. What is to be done? Should we work in a bourgeois parliamentary democracy? Should we work in worker unions? All these questions will be answered with this section on scientific socialism, because we understand that there is an undeniable material reality, organs of state power that suppress worker movements, and that capitalists have an immense amount of power to command labor and command the special body of armed men, the police, to crush dissent. We know that it's impossible to just abolish capitalism or the state overnight and wish for something good to come out of this. We need a plan, and one that is clear to follow. The first one is Reform or Revolution by Rosa Luxemburg, who argued against the Bernsteinian reformism and in favor of revolution. In this text, she argues that socialism cannot be achieved in a parliamentary democracy. through gradual reforms, even though these reforms helped build class consciousness, and that a revolutionary transformation of society is needed to truly liberate the working class. Then, to understand the role of the state as an organ of class rule, and how a revolution works, what do we do with the state after the capitalists are overthrown, these are all points addressed by Lenin in this book. It has to be one of the most important works I've recommended in this video. What is to be done is a 1902 pamphlet by Lenin covering the strategy of a vanguard party, syndicalism, how to lead popular movement in a way that avoids dogmatism and endless movementism. The strategy is still very relevant today. Now, Combat Liberalism by Mao Zedong is a one-pager covering the way to combat liberalism in the party and in general discourse. And it's a good quick read on how to talk to liberals and oppose their reactionary tendencies while bringing them closer to the class struggle. Now, Left Anti-Communism and an Infantile Disorder is a 1920 work by Lenin in defense of the Bolshevik Revolution against critiques of the Bolsheviks from anarchists, social democrats, and from other sections of the left. It talks also about trade unions, of bourgeois parliamentarism, and I think it's very important to read this, prevent yourself from diving into tendencies that serve the interest of the bourgeoisie. Next, the critique of the Gotha program by Marx is something he wrote in 1875, where he critiques the program of a draft by the United Workers' Party of Germany, where he addresses the dictatorship of the proletariat, the socialist transition to communism as a stage of historical development, rather than either socialism or social democracy as an end-all be-all, or communism as an immediate political goal, and then he goes over commodity production and proletarian internationalism. This is a work that is very insightful and very helpful to argue against ultra-left and rightist positions. Now, one thing's for sure, there are settler colonies like the USA and Canada, and there are the countries of the imperial core in Europe. The following elements are very important to grasp. First of all, the importance of the national question, and second of all, decolonization, what it is and how to do it. And the lesson here from these readings is quickly that the national question is important, but the fight for proletarian internationalism is foremost important. Rather, we stay united with the workers of all countries and build socialism and oppose capitalism, and in settler colonial states, we wage a struggle shoulder to shoulder with indigenous nations as a proletarian class struggle. Now, these are selected 3 articles from Lenin by Foreign Languages Press that I upload in the description. They broadly go over the socialist revolution and the right of nations to self-determination, as well as the colonial question. Now, to understand the settler-native relations and the concept of nations in Canada specifically, the NCPC has a great exposé on the party program that focuses on a very straightforward analysis of national struggles, how they should be addressed, and the necessity of socialism to eliminate these settler indigenous contradictions inside these settler colonial states. And then it goes on to say how socialism is necessary to eliminate the contradictions and the struggles between these different nations inside Canada. Finally, there's a good article by Jared Houston titled Becoming Proletariat on Stolen Land, Decolonization and Class Consciousness, which puts forward the point that to engage in class struggle is to have a revolutionary alliance with indigenous peoples, indigenous nations. Now, this second to last section regards engaging in class struggle as a communist militant, and it gives us the tools to be strong, principled, and capable of mobilizing and listening to the broader masses. The first lesson here is that one who did not investigate a matter is not allowed to speak upon it, right? You gotta know your shit. Otherwise, you risk the integrity of the entire movement. Second of all, as communists, we must be willing to take risks in order to advance the class struggle. Socialism doesn't rise by itself, and we don't contribute to change by LARPing online from our armchairs or making these videos like I'm doing today. I'm not gonna dive into the details for very obvious reasons, but this channel is just one part of the things I'm doing as a communist. Araling Aktivista by the Communist Party of the Philippines is a document I'm currently reading, and it is a mandatory reading for the Filipino Communist Party and their members engaging in actual current armed struggle against the Filipino government. The first part of this document is a basic revolutionary attitude and Mao Zedong's 5 golden rays, which are foundational articles that he wrote Then it covers revolutionary study, the principle of the mass line, and more importantly, democratic centralism within the party. It is a very insightful document to understand the reality of global South communist movements. Then One Step Forward, Two Steps Back, and Party Work in the Masses by Lenin are pretty good articles on Bolshevik revolutionary work, and I recommend you read them. And if you're looking for works that cover historical events like the Stalin era of the USSR or the Maoist Cultural Revolution and Great Leap Forward, please make sure they cite primary sources, or at the very least, don't just throw blanket accusations at people who oppose the imperialist capitalist West. And if you question the legitimacy of a certain work because they sided with ex-leader like Stalin or Mao, why not question the legitimacy of those who sided vehemently against them and wrote works only to discredit socialism for the benefit of the US Epstein line, right? So be principled, be critical of what you read or hear from people who serve the interest of the bourgeoisie. In any case, I suggest you work on your own reactionary or opportunist tendencies, engage in self-criticism, and work up the guts to critique your comrades engaging in such tendencies. So join a principled party or a worker organization in your area. If you're in Eastern Canada or Quebec and you are looking to get organized, please contact me via the email in my channel description and I'll be sure to help you out. Thanks for watching, and read up on theory, please. Read, read, read!